In his modest home, Jacob Eisenhardt is trying to assemble a necklace. Frustrated, he drops the pieces on the floor, commenting to his younger brother Eric that he is dropping more links than he is fixing these days. Jacob's son, Max Eisenhardt, arrives and quickly gathers the metal trinkets to help his father. Jacob tells Max to show his uncle what he has been working on, and Max holds up a necklace with ornately shaped metal pieces. His uncle is amazed by his beautiful work, and his father praises his son's craftsmanship, impressed with his skill at only 9 years old. Eric says that this means he's got a girl, as Max's mother enters the room asking Eric if he wants Max to run around acting like he does, especially in times like this. But Eric replies that it's all the more reason to have some fun, telling Max that he should smile if a pretty girl gives him that certain look. The next day, at school, Max prepares to compete in a series of physical challenges. The group of schoolboys stands at attention as their headmaster addresses them, but Max is distracted by a young girl named Magda that is sweeping the floor nearby. Max tries to get Magda's attention, and when she finally looks at him, he smiles despite the racist comment from a blonde boy next to him. As the boys engage in their trials, the blonde boy taunts Max, insulting Magda. Max tries to rebuff, but he is called back to attention by the headmaster. He calls the boys to look at Max, saying that he is small and weak. Max sinks under the scrutiny of his headmaster, staring at the ground, and the headmaster points this out as a further sign of weakness and cowardice. Max's teacher, Herr Kalb, interrupts, trying to point out that Max is near the top of the class in almost every subject. But the headmaster says that this is merely a sign of his degenerate cunning, vastly different from real intelligence. Herr Kalb reluctantly agrees. The boys are then called to participate in their final event, the javelin throw. Max, still dejected from the racist criticism, catches a glance from Magda, bringing a smile to his face. He then throws the javelin with all his might, and to everyone's surprise it lands several feet beyond the furthest javelin. The headmaster grimaces at this achievement, as Herr Kalb tries to hide his satisfaction. Max is awarded the gold medal, and later, Max bounds happily out of the school, as he is stopped by Herr Kalb, who tells him that he is gifted and special, but that he needs to be careful, sharing a proverb: the nail that sticks up gets hammered down. Max apologizes and says that he has to go, rushing off, trying to catch up with Magda. He follows into a crowded town square, calling out to her, and as she turns and reaches out for him, Max gives her a small box. Magda smiles and tells him goodbye. Max cheers with elation, and his sentiment is echoed by the crowd, who is cheering widely, flying Nazi flags and raising their hands in salute to the assembled Nazi troops. Max looks around and realizes that on the platform in front of him is his uncle Eric, badly beaten with a sign around his neck saying, "I have shamed a German woman." That evening, Max shows his medal to his family, and his father tells him that they gave him medals too, and that he was even called a hero for his service in World War I, allowing him to keep his job with the government, quoting President Hindenburg, who said that the Jews who bled for Germany in the Great War were German enough for him. But Eric, resting on the couch nearby, tells his brother that isn't the case anymore. Jacob asks if they should run then, and Eric agrees. Max's sister Ruth chimes in, saying that her uncle may be right, since the people already assume she is German and a Christian. Her father corrects her and tells her that she is German despite their Jew heritage. Jacob asks his wife what she thinks, but she pulls him to the kitchen to help with dinner, as he smiles down at Max, telling him that at least he showed them. They can't take that away. The next day at school, the headmaster orders Max to stand before the class, announcing that the javelin he threw the day before was defective. He demands Max to return the medal unless he is able to duplicate his feat with the regulation javelin. Once more, Max stands on the practice field. The other boys, the headmaster, Herr Kalb and Magda are all there. Max feels that the javelin is considerably heavier than regulation, and he expresses this to Herr Kalb, who tells him to just throw it. Max glares at the headmaster with anger and throws the javelin. It soars far, well beyond the flag, leaving Herr Kalb worried and the headmaster seething with anger. Max looks towards Magda, who smiles and brings her hand to the necklace he made for her. Later that day, Max is summoned to the headmaster's office. The headmaster tells him that the Reich has no place for cheating Jews, expelling him from the school. As Max is leaving, he hears shouting coming from another room. The door opens to a pair of Nazi soldiers who are beating her calf, while the man begs them to look at his papers. Max is then surprised by the other German boys. Max tries to run as they chase him out onto the schoolyard, where several others are waiting. Max tries to fight back, but he is quickly overwhelmed, as they beat him with Golden Reich medals. Max remembers the words of her call: "The nail that sticks up gets hammered down." It's 1936. Max and his father sit in a train as Jacob shows his son an old photo from his days in the German army, depicting Jacob and an old friend, Major Scharf, who Jacob believes can help him get his job back, since Scharf is working for the government nowadays, and Jacob saved his life once in the war. Jacob adds that it may have been even better had Scharf been the one who saved his life, since people who have helped you once love to do so again as a way of confirming their own good judgment. He then changes the subject by snatching away Max's journal, finding the photograph of Magda that Max has hidden inside. His father chuckles, while Max sinks into his seat, embarrassed. Jacob promises that he won't tell his mother, but asks if she is Jewish. They are interrupted by the conductor asking for their papers. Jacob complies, and the conductor opens the document marked inside with a large J for Jew. The two arrive safely in Berlin. They notice the workers removing the anti-Semitic signs, and Jacob believes that this is a sign of change, telling Max that with the Olympics here and the eyes of the world on Berlin, they will have no trouble. Jacob instructs Max to stay at a nearby restaurant watching the games, while he takes care of his business. Later, Jacob emerges from the government offices, apologizing to Max for the long wait, explaining that he couldn't see Major Scharf since he must have been very busy. As Jacob gazes at his army medal, he notices a blonde soldier walk by, angrily complaining about the black man winning 4 gold medals in the Olympics, and at that moment, Major Scharf leaves the building. Jacob calls out to him, saying that he was waiting to see him. He begins to ask if he has a minute to talk, when a guard interrupts, saying that he wanted to speak with the person who was making trouble in the Major's office today. Scharf says that there was no trouble really, and that Jacob was just leaving. Jacob agrees and tries to go away with Max, but the guard calls out to the blonde soldier passing nearby and orders him to stop Jacob. The soldier hatefully knocks Jacob to the ground as he explains that he was a soldier too, a veteran, but the soldier punches him, while Max, in shock, shouts for his father, trying to aid him but being held back by Scharf, who throws him to the ground. The guard looks at Max asking Scharf who the boy is, but Scharf replies that he's nobody, while the guards drag Jacob inside. Later, Max waits, when suddenly they open the doors and shove his father down the stairs. Max races over to help, while Major Scharf says that they could have killed him, they're even now, and leaves. Jacob looks up at Max and begins to ask for something. Max understands, returning the medal to his father's hands, and Jacob embraces his son. The next day, father and son board the train home. They notice the anti-Semitic signs being restored to their former places. Jacob looks down at Max and tells him that Scharf's done him a favor now, so they'll come back in a month or 2 to see if he'll help him again. He tells Max not to worry, optimistically adding that it can't get worse than this. Meanwhile, Magda and her mother are among the gypsies who have been forcibly relocated to the Marzahn detention camp. She watches as the train passes by behind the barbed wire and asks her mother when they can go home. Her mother tells her to be patient as Magda looks down at the necklace that Max made for her. It's 1938, in Nuremberg. Max is scouring the streets for valuables. Some German boys recognize Max from school, and one of them taunts Max with a gold coin, throwing it into the filth. Max looks at it longingly, and the boys laugh at Max for even considering going after it. Filled with anger, Max drives the boy headfirst into the muck, retrieves the coin, and runs away. As his pals help the boy to his feet, an older man passes by laughing. The gang grabs the man, demanding to know where Max is, beating him up. Hiding behind the corner, Max refuses to stand by and boldly calls out to them. Back at home, Max sits with his family as his mother tends to his black eye. He explains that he tripped, reaching for a coin, to his mother's disbelief. His uncle Eric shares the news of a German attaché that had been assassinated by a Jew in Paris. He tells his brother that it is time to go, suggesting that they flee to Poland. Jacob points out that the Nazis have already shipped the Polish Jews back to Poland, but they won't even take them. He argues that they should stay in Germany and figure out the rules to get through this. Eric notes that in Austria they are taking people's property and kicking them out of the country. Jacob turns to Max demanding to know the truth of how he got beat up, asking if he walked away from the fight, but Max reluctantly replies that he did not. Eric praises his nephew's courage, but Jacob remembers rule number 1, fight back and they'll stomp you in your head. Eric asks if that's what he wants to teach his son, and Jacob shouts that he only wants his son to live, but sinks back into his chair, saying that he wants all of them to live. Later that night, Jacob and his wife are in bed talking more about the changing climate in Germany. In the next room, hearing his parents' conversation, Max peers through the window and sees a group of Nazi soldiers forcing their way into a Jewish home. He rushes to his parents' room, telling them they have to go. Moments later, the entire family flees through an alleyway leading to a nearby graveyard. An explosion catches their attention as they watch the synagogue being consumed by flames. Chaos erupts in the streets as Nazi soldiers ransack Jewish homes and force families into the streets. Hiding, the family watches in horror as Nazi soldiers violently beat up the Jewish. Jacob looks at his wife and children out of view of the soldiers as the reality of their situation sets in. It's September 1939. Max and his family have made their way into Poland. They seek refuge with the relatives of a friend that lets them hide in their barn. Jacob says again that it can't get any worse than this, but at that moment, their hostess cries out that the Germans must have invaded as a battalion of Polish soldiers on horseback rides by. Max chases after them and sees that at the end of the road, a contingent of German tanks is rolling over the hillside towards them. Nazi airplanes begin the bombardment of Poland's countryside as Max and his family tries to hide from the approaching German army. Another group of people nearby asks them where they are going, and Jacob replies that they are heading for the city, but the others tell him that the city is already taken by the Nazis. Max notices soldiers approaching their location and alerts his father and uncle. They flee, leaving the other people behind, who are caught and killed by the soldiers. Jacob urges Max forward, trying to spare his son from seeing the slaughter. His sister Ruth asks where they're going, and Uncle Eric replies they're going to Warsaw, explaining that there are thousands of Jews there, and at least they'll not be alone there. The Eisenhardts arrive in Warsaw, and soon they're forced to move into the Jewish sector that will be known as the Warsaw Ghetto. Months later, the ghetto is enclosed by a 10-foot high wall. 2 years later, in December 1941, Jews die of hunger with the very reduced rations the Germans provide. People steal and fight to survive. Witnessing one of those fights, Max grabs a chunk of bread that falls beside him and hands it to a boy that got bit trying to steal the same piece of bread. Max continues along the inner wall of the ghetto until he comes to a hole at the base. He removes his Star of David armband, and when the soldiers on the other side are not looking, he crawls through. The hungry boy from before watches this, and unbeknownst to Max, he follows him, but is immediately caught by a soldier who forces him to his knees and shoots him. Hidden, Max notices this and pulls out a thin knife, but before he can do anything he is pulled back by his uncle Eric, who's smuggling outside the wall just like him. Max tells him he could have killed the soldiers, but his uncle notes that if he did, 100 more Jews would have been slaughtered in retaliation, just like it happened in the past. Max protests, but Eric tells him that they cannot punish the Nazis, but can defeat them if they keep surviving. They part ways and Max wanders, eventually finding a gold coin buried in the snow. Later, Max returns to the ghetto and finds his father and the other Jews in line to surrender their coats, furs, and wraps. He shows his father the food he got, and Jacob tells him to take it to his sister. Not long after, Max sits next to Ruthie's bed, holding her hand. She has grown pale and gaunt from hunger. Their mother brings the soup with the food Max brought and feeds her. As she sips the soup, she grips Max's hand as a sign of gratitude. It's July 1942. In a train station full of people, Max wanders around hearing a man whisper to another to not get on the trains, saying that they are killing people and that the food they're promising are lies to bribe the people to obey. Max continues to listen intently, that families are being kept together and given food and shelter in exchange for hard work. Then, he peers into the freight, noticing traces of blood. Max returns home and tells his father and uncle what he saw. Uncle Eric reports that they have received word from an escapee who says that the trains go to Treblinka, where people are told they are going to be given baths, but instead are gassed to death in the showers. He tells Jacob that they are no longer being given the choice to leave. The Nazis are pulling the weakest from the streets and forcing them onto the trains, cautioning his brother that if the Nazis were to find Ruthie or him, they would surely take them, but continues saying that thankfully his son grew up to be a smuggler. That very night, the Eisenhardts sneak out of the ghetto through the hole in the wall. Eric instructs them to meet a woman named Cecilia at the Vistula River, and Max realizes that Eric doesn't intend to join them. Max asks him if he's staying to fight, and Eric confirms, so Max insists on staying too. Eric denies him, but Jacob steps in reminding Max of Major Scharf, whose life he saved, and shares a piece of wisdom he learned from this. Sometimes in life, you get a moment, a time when everything lines up, and when suddenly you can make things happen. He holds his son's face in his hands, showing pride in his son. Max watches his father, mother and sister turning to leave, and his uncle crawling back through the hole. Max makes his choice and leads his family safely to the Vistula, where Cecilia is waiting for them. They board the boat and row to a spot further up the river. As they approach a clearing, Max spots something. A small squad of soldiers emerges, and one of them hits Max across the forehead. Jacob raises his hands in surrender as Cecilia apologizes for her betrayal. The soldiers line them up in front of a large open grave where other Jews have been gathered. Max's mother holds Ruthie tightly to her, and his father places his arm around Max's shoulder. Max stares directly at the soldiers who are about to fire. He remembers his father's words as the soldiers pull the trigger. He stares coldly at the bullets flying towards them. The bullets appear to hang midair, but in this instant of opportunity, Jacob pushes Max off as the barrage hits them all as they fall, along with Max, into the mass grave. Max wakes up and pulls himself out. He makes his way into the night, and for a short time he tries to survive until he's caught by the Nazis. He is forced onto a train headed for the camps. As he travels the countryside, he watches through the spaces between the boards, seeing a German farmer drawing his thumb across his neck grimly. That night, the train arrives at its final destination, Auschwitz. September 1942, Max arrives at Auschwitz along with a mass of other Jews. As they arrive, Nazi soldiers separate the men from the women and children, with prisoners in striped uniforms helping the newcomers. Max is called out by a prisoner who recognizes him. Max looks up to see his old teacher Herkal, who asks him for his family. With no reply, Kalb says he's sorry and then whispers to Max to give him anything small and valuable that he may have on him. Max seems confused, but Kalb tells him to trust him. Max hands him a paper, and then Kalb tells him to stand up straight and tell them that he is 18 and willing to work. One of the Nazi guards urges Max along, and on his way he turns to another boy and gives him the same advice he got from Kalb. Moments later, Max stands before a doctor from the camps, telling him what Kalb told him to say. An officer takes a moment before telling Max to move to the right. Max turns to look at a woman being separated from her baby, but a soldier points him towards the camp and yells at him to keep moving. joining the stream of men being herded through the gates of the camp. Inside, they're ordered to take their clothes off. Max and the other men comply, and then the other uniformed prisoners come in and shave their heads. They're then taken to another room where prisoner numbers are tattooed on their forearms. After this, they're forced to take a bath and are issued striped uniforms bearing a yellow Star of David, and finally are taken to the barracks that are shared by the Jewish men in the camp. Later, a Nazi officer comes to the barracks and asks if there are any boys under 16, telling them not to be scared, that there's been a mistake and they should have been taken to school instead. Max whispers to another boy to not comply, but the boy, scared, takes his chance as the officer punches Max and takes the boy. Max sinks to the floor defeated and then hears the shots fired outside. The next day, Max takes his food and is approached by Kalb, who tells him he heard about what happened the night before. Max tells him that he tried to stop one of the boys, and Kalb smiles, remembering that he was his most stubborn student. He reminisces about Max's javelin throw, saying he was supposed to let the Aryan boys win, but was trying to impress the cleaning woman's daughter. Kalb hands him the photo of Magda, the only valuable thing he slipped him the day before. Kalb tells him that he was such a hero that day in school, but warns him that this camp is no place for heroes. Kalb explains that he is part of the Canada Commando. They sort through the belongings of the new arrivals, explaining that it is the best job in the camp, and that he plans to have Max transferred over when he gets the proper bribes together, telling Max to just stay alive. Kalb tells him that they'll kill him if he breaks the rules, but that he will starve in a month if he follows them, but assures him he'll figure it out since he was his smartest student. Max follows this advice, working hard, but taking what he can to trade for extra food. He manages to survive until someone comes to fetch him for his new work assignment. He is led to Kalb, who is waiting for him, but an officer intervenes, telling the man that brought Max that he has lost a man yesterday, but insinuating he has an extra, gazing at Max. The man turns Max to the officer without protest. Kalb tries to argue, but the man shoves Max towards the officer and hits Kalb, telling him to shut up or he'll get them both killed. The officer leads Max to a building where a group of women and children are gathered. The officer addresses the crowd and explains that additional disinfecting is needed to prevent an outbreak of typhus, promising soup and coffee after. Expressing some content, the women and children strip down as instructed. They're led into the building and the officer shuts the door behind them. Max and the other prisoners are then ordered to load the women's belongings as Max hears the cries for help from inside the building. In shock, Max asks the other prisoners if they knew about this and why they said nothing. One of the prisoners sarcastically encourages Max to go ahead and tell them himself next time, so they can panic and get beat and shot by the Nazis. Max looks up and watches the Nazis loading the poisonous gas, while the prisoner next to him welcomes him to the Sonderkommando. Max brings the belongings of the slaughtered to the Canada warehouse to be stored. Kalb approaches and tells him that this is not how it was supposed to happen and assures him that he will get him out, pleading him to not give up. Max is then presented with a sight that shakes even his youthful resolve, a single room piled with thousands upon thousands of eyeglasses, each representing a life extinguished. Max writes a letter telling his story as a Sonderkommando for the past 2 years. He watched thousands of men, women and children walk to their deaths. He pulled their bodies from the gas chambers and dug out their teeth for gold. He carried them to the ovens, where he learned to combine a child's body with an old man's to make them burn better, and saw his fellow workers buried alive in an avalanche of rotting corpses. He's seen at least 250,000 dead human beings with his own eyes, and he couldn't save a single one, any more than they could save him. Max begs forgiveness to whoever finds this letter, asking to tell everyone who will listen and who won't, and begging not to let this ever happen again. Max is morose. With her Kalb dead, he has lost all hope. He breaks away from his group and heads towards the electrified fence. As he approaches, he sees a glimmer of light. A young girl in the neighboring camp is cradling something shiny in her hands. Max's eyes grow wide with disbelief as he sees the girl. They recognize each other as Max smiles at Magda. The moment is broken when an officer yells for Eisenhardt. and Max immediately falls in line with a newfound hope. It's May 31st, 1944. The prisoners of Auschwitz watch as a plane passes directly overhead. Two prisoners discuss that it's a matter of time before the Allies know everything and bomb the camps. Close by, Max points out that if they bomb the area, it might kill them as well. The other prisoner replies that the Nazis will kill them anyway, since, as Sonderkommandos, they know too much to be left alive. Max makes his way to the fence that separates his detention camp and the neighboring gypsy camp, where Magda is being held. He calls out to her and tosses a piece of food. They exchange worries about each other's situation, but Max tells her not to worry about him, instructing her to go to the infirmary and talk to a nurse named Schulman. He has arranged a job there that will get her more rations and medicine. An SS guard arrives and their exchange is cut short. Max tells Magda to stay alive, and as Max walks away, he casually hands a gold tooth to the SS guard. A month later, tending to one of the outdoor pits, Max listens to a conversation between two SS guards and learns that they'll clear out the gypsy camp by the end of July. At the barracks, one of the men compliments Max on the gold tooth that Max has delivered to him. Max asks how many grenades it will buy and if they have enough. The man bluntly admits that to fight the SS, they'll never have enough. Another man says they have some time to collect more, since the revolt has been postponed to August 15th, and horror crosses Max's face. That is too late for Magda. Later, a meeting between Max and Magda is arranged by Nurse Schulman and the bribed guard. Max tells her that her camp is scheduled to be liquidated next month, that there'll be one last train out beforehand that she'll be on, and that if something goes wrong, she must hide herself in the corpse pile. He explains that he's bribed the Lacan commando and that they will bring her to him at the crematorium, telling her that a revolt is planned and that he will get her out of there. Magda is quiet for a moment and then tells him that she saw him at the fire pits, where a Nazi scientist threw something alive into the fire and that nobody did anything. Max swears she's going to live, asking her to not give up. The next day, another shipment of new arrivals makes their way to their death, as an American plane passes by. The Sonderkommandos watch as it passes, hoping to bomb them already, but Max keeps his attention on the woman and their babies. Later, Max tends to the fiery pits. The SS guard he has bribed informed him that Magda is on the transport as promised. He hands the guard more gold teeth, and the guard adds that she and the other woman will end up in Ravensbrück, where they do experiments on people. He tells Max she'll end up cursing his name, but she's probably not the only one, as Max glances down at the pit full of smoldering corpses. October 5th, 1944. In the barracks, the men argue over the impending revolt, which has been delayed several times. Once again, the resistance has asked the prisoners not to fight back. One of the men says that 300 Sonderkommandos will be dead soon. Another man argues that if they revolt, the whole camp will suffer, and Max scoffs at this, telling the men how he and his father did nothing with their opportunities for fear of retaliation, concluding that he did nothing and the Nazis retaliated anyway. Max tells them it's time, and then they outline their plans to revolt in 2 days. One of the men knows there will be no night transport, so fewer guards will be present. He tells them to go about their normal work and wait for his signal sometime after dark, telling them not to do anything stupid until then. As Max works the next day, Nurse Schulman signals to him. He draws close and she tells him that Magda and half of the gypsies have been brought back and are now being starved to death. Max is devastated. She tries to console him, saying that he did everything he could, that his efforts and the gold he sent helped more people than he knows. But Max turns his focus and asks if the corpse pile is still outside the sauna. October 7th, 1944, the day of the revolt. The Sonderkommando receives another load of corpses from the gypsy camp. Max approaches the cart as his colleague tries to keep Max away from seeing Magda's body. He insists and looks inside, seeing Magda, eyes open, calling out to him. They take Magda to the men's barracks, and she explains that she did what Max told her to do. He reassures her that it's going to be alright, but the men are fearful that her presence will upset their plans for revolt. One asks what they'll do if the guards find her, and Max replies they'll kill them. The man says they're supposed to wait for dark, but Max points out that the dark will not help them much since they have meager weapons. The man suggests they turn Magda over to the guards and let them handle it. Max draws his knife and stands up to the man. The man stares Max down, saying that in the morning Max stood by while thousands of women were gassed, but now they're supposed to risk everything for the life of one girl. Another man steps in and tells them that right now the Nazis are preparing to kill the men at Crematory 4, and that someone there is thinking the same. How many people die now so the rest can live? But he is tired of the question and refuses to drag an innocent girl downstairs to her death. He says no to this, looking at Max for approval, but his brave words are cut short by a massive explosion from Crematorium 4. The guards react as the prisoners start their revolt. They storm out of the barracks and attack. Remembering his father's words, Max grabs Magda and runs away from the gunfire. Other prisoners pry open the gates and they make a run for it. Amidst the chaos, Max and Magda flee together to the woods. Four years later, in September 1948, at the ruins of Crematorium 5 at Auschwitz, after the camps were liberated, Max digs out the container in which he concealed the letter he wrote in his time there. He reflects on that moment, that horrible chapter of his life, looking to the skies and hoping that never happens again.